millionaire collapses at a rural clinic and falls in love with the only nurse who didn't recognize him. The sun beat down hard on the dusty field just outside the small town of Willow Creek. A makeshift stage had been set up in front of the skeletal remains of what was to be the future Sunrise Elementary. Folding chairs stretched out before it, filled with townspeople, teachers, local officials, and a scattering of curious children. A banner above the stage fluttered in the warm breeze. "Together we build tomorrow." Michael Thorne stood at the podium, sleeves rolled up, smile rehearsed. Cameras flashed as he spoke into the mic, his voice steady, charismatic, practiced. "This school will not just be a building," he said. "It will be a beacon, where hope is taught, where dreams begin. I believe that every child, regardless of where they are born, deserves the same start." The crowd clapped politely. Some looked genuinely hopeful. Others exchanged skeptical glances. Michael took a breath, his fingers gripping the edges of the podium. Then something shifted. A flash of pain passed through his chest. He paused, blinked, swayed slightly. A bead of sweat slid down his temple, not from the heat. He tried to continue. But the word died on his tongue. Suddenly, he stumbled back. His eyes rolled slightly and his knees buckled. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Michael Thorne, one of the richest men in the country, collapsed on stage. "Somebody call for help! Is there a doctor?" Panic erupted. A few security men rushed the stage, others fumbled for phones. Within moments, Michael was carried down to a nearby truck and rushed toward the town's only clinic. The Willow Creek Medical Station was small, more a converted farmhouse than a true facility. Inside, the fluorescent lights flickered faintly as the door burst open. "Emergency!" someone shouted. "He's not breathing right." A young woman in scrubs rushed into the hallway, her hair tied back, stethoscope already swinging from her neck. She was barely 5'5", but there was steel in her eyes. Her name badge read, Dr. Iowa Rivers. "What happened?" she asked, stepping forward, assessing the pale man on the stretcher. "Chest pain. Collapsed at the event. His pulse is weak, breathing irregular." Iowa pressed her fingers against his neck, checked his pupils, then turned sharply toward the nurse at her side. "This is a cardiac emergency, massive myocardial infarction, possibly involving the left anterior descending artery." The older nurse, Judith, frowned. "We need to get him to the city. We're not equipped for this." "He won't survive the trip," Iowa said without hesitation. "We need to intervene now." A murmur ran through the room. Another nurse, a local woman named Helen, spoke up. "Dr. Rivers, this is beyond what we can handle here. You're fresh out of med school. Maybe we wait for the airlift." "There's no time," Iowa said. She pointed to the vitals monitor. "Look at his stats. He's crashing." "We wait, he dies." The room was tense. Judith stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You've never done this procedure without supervision. You're not ready." "I am," Iowa replied, calm but firm. "If I do nothing, he dies. If I try, he might live. That's all the logic I need." The team hesitated. One of the aides muttered, "We're going to lose the biggest donor this town's ever seen to a rookie." Iowa shot him a look. "I'm not thinking about his name. I'm thinking about his heart right now, failing in front of us." A beat passed. Then Judith sighed and handed her the tray of emergency supplies. "Then let's save him." They moved quickly. Iowa took the lead, issuing commands like someone twice her age. With no cath lab, no advanced imaging, she used every ounce of skill and instinct. She administered the clot-busting drugs manually, adjusted the oxygen, used the portable EKG to confirm her suspicion, and monitored every flicker of the heart monitor like it was scripture. 30 minutes passed. 45. A single, clear beep stabilized. Iowa let out a shaky breath, stepping back from the bed as the monitor held steady. Michael's color began to return. His breathing evened. "He's stable," she said softly. The room was silent. Judith looked at her, expression unreadable. Then she gave a slow nod. "You just saved his life." Iowa didn't smile. She just glanced at the man lying on the table, unaware of what had happened, and whispered, "Let's hope he wakes up with a good heart in more ways than one." Michael awoke to the faint scent of antiseptic and the soft hum of fluorescent lights overhead. For a moment, he did not know where he was. His body ached, his chest throbbed with a dull but unmistakable weight, and his mouth was dry like sandpaper. He tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness pulled him back. A calm voice spoke from his right. "Do not move too fast. You just survived a heart attack." He turned his head, slowly, to see a young woman standing beside him, clipboard in hand, her tone firm and neutral. She was dressed in scrubs, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her expression was unreadable, neither cold nor warm, just professional. "What happened?" he rasped. "You collapsed yesterday at the school site," she replied. "You were brought here. We had to act immediately. There was no time to transfer you to the city." "You saved me?" "I led the procedure, yes." Michael blinked. "Thank you, truly. I'm Michael Thorne," she said, without looking up from her chart. "We figured that out from your ID." He chuckled softly, wincing at the tightness in his chest. "So you do know who I am." "I know your name. That's all I need," she said flatly. Michael paused, expecting at least a flicker of recognition, awe, even admiration. He was used to people knowing him, not just his name, but his face, his Forbes profile, his charity interviews. Yet the woman before him seemed utterly indifferent. "I'm sorry," he said slowly. "I didn't catch yours." "Iowa Rivers," she replied. "Well, Dr. Rivers, thank you again. You saved my life." She gave a small nod, but her eyes didn't soften. "Just doing my job." He frowned slightly. "You don't seem particularly glad about it." She raised an eyebrow, finally meeting his gaze. "Would you prefer a parade?" Michael laughed awkwardly. "No, most people don't speak to me like this. I'm not most people." He tilted his head. "Clearly." There was a long pause. Michael studied her face, trying to place her reaction. There was no fear, no reverence, no curiosity, just calm, guarded detachment. He tried again. "I came here to fund a school," he said gently. "I wanted to see it through. That's why I was in town." "I know," Iowa said. "You don't sound convinced." She turned slightly, placing her clipboard down on the small metal table. "We've had men like you come here before, with plans, with money, with promises. A groundbreaking, a banner, some photos for your PR team. Then you vanish, and we're left with half a building and whole dreams that never made it to the walls." Michael's mouth parted slightly in surprise. "I'm not like them," he said, a little defensive now. Iowa gave a small, tired smile, not mocking, just weary. "That's what they all say." He swallowed, unsure how to respond. The air between them grew heavier. "I know your type, Mr. Thorne," she added, her voice low but not unkind. "You mean well, but this place doesn't need more headlines. It needs follow through." Michael stared at her, stunned. He had stood in rooms full of critics before, handled boardroom interrogations and press conferences, but this was different. This was personal. And the strangest thing was, she wasn't wrong. He sank back against the pillow, his chest tight, not from the pain now, but from something else. Something unspoken. Iowa glanced at the monitor, made a quick note on her chart, then said, "You should rest. I'll check on you later." As she turned to leave, Michael called out softly, "Do you always treat your patients like this?" She paused at the door. "Only the famous ones." Michael was told he would need to stay at the clinic for at least 10 days. His heart was still fragile, and the attending physician, Dr. Iowa Rivers, had made it very clear that he wasn't leaving a moment earlier than medically advised. "Another episode like that," she had said, "and you might not be lucky enough to be near a stubborn doctor next time." He had smiled, trying to break through her professional armor, but she had already turned away. So he stayed, and for the first time in years, he found himself still. No meetings, no press, no investors, just the creak of old floorboards, the hum of fluorescent lights, and the occasional murmur of distant conversations down the hallway. Michael made a decision on day 2. He would drop the title. No mention of Thorne Enterprises, no reminders of who he was or what he owned. He was just Mike, recovering heart patient in room 3. Most people at the clinic didn't recognize him. This town was far from Wall Street and the magazine covers. To them, he was just another man in need of care, and for once he welcomed the anonymity. He watched Iowa work from a distance. She moved quickly, efficiently, her presence calm but commanding. With the elderly man in room 2, she knelt to check his ankle and stayed a few extra minutes to talk about his late wife's garden. With the young mother down the hall, she helped feed the baby and offered to watch the toddler while the woman showered. But with Michael, still just Mike, she was different. Cordial, professional, but distant. No small talk, no warmth. She treated his heart, not his presence. At first, he thought she was cold. Then he noticed how she paused just slightly longer at each monitor, how her eyes flicked back one last time before she walked out of a room, how she always carried an extra granola bar in her pocket for the kid who refused to eat. She wasn't cold, she was careful. And beneath that care, something heavier lingered, a weariness far beyond her years, a skepticism that didn't come from textbooks, it came from experience. Michael became fascinated. He asked the nurse Judith about her. "She came straight here after med school," Judith said. "Could have gone anywhere, but she chose Willow Creek. Said this town had stories that no one wanted to listen to. Said she was tired of noise." Michael looked out the window, past the gravel road and into the wide fields beyond. "She doesn't talk much." "She used to," Judith said. "Then the last school project here fell apart. Promises were made. People got excited. And then it stopped. No building. No answers. Just silence." Michael's chest tightened. "She saw it all happen as a teenager," Judith added. "Iowa doesn't hate hope. She just hates liars." That night, Michael lay awake staring at the ceiling. He had never thought of his presence as a burden before. He had always believed his name brought opportunity. But here it brought skepticism. Here it was a ghost of promises past. He watched Iowa again the next day. She stitched a boy's knee while humming softly. She argued with the pharmacist about lowering the cost of insulin for an elderly patient. She laughed, actually laughed, when a 5-year-old called her Dr. Robot. And still, with him, she stayed guarded. He found himself wanting to know more. Not about her resume, but her reasons. What had made someone so young, already so worn? What had made her so brave, yet so alone? He began asking gentle questions during her check-ins. "Do you always hum when you're stitching? What's the story behind your name? Did you always want to be a doctor?" Sometimes she would answer briefly, sometimes she would pretend not to hear. But Michael noticed the faint shift, the way her shoulders relaxed just a little more each day, the way her eyes didn't avoid his quite so often. He wasn't sure if she liked him, but he was certain she intrigued him, and he, in turn, was slowly realizing that no amount of wealth or reputation had ever made him feel quite like this, like he was discovering something worth listening to, even in silence. Michael found her behind the clinic one evening, sitting on the low stone wall that bordered the back garden. The sun was sinking below the horizon, washing the sky in streaks of gold and lavender. Iowa had her arms folded across her chest, her expression unreadable. He approached slowly, heart steady but unsure. "Do you mind some company?" She didn't answer right away. Then, with a small shrug, she said, "Free country." He sat beside her, careful to leave space between them. They sat in silence for a few moments, listening to the crickets begin their nightly chorus. "You're a mystery, Dr. Rivers," he said softly. She glanced at him. "That's intentional." Michael gave a half smile. "You treat everyone here like they matter. You stay late, you work hard, but with me, it's like you've already decided who I am." "I have," she replied without hesitation. He frowned. "Why?" Her jaw tensed, then relaxed. "Because I've seen this before. You're not the first man to show up here with a smile, a camera crew, and a promise." "There was no camera crew," he said. She turned to him, eyes sharp. "But there was a promise, wasn't there?" Michael inhaled slowly. "I don't make promises I can't keep." "Good," she said, voice suddenly tight, "because the last man who did left behind more than just broken plans." He looked at her, waiting. She didn't speak for a long moment. Then she leaned forward slightly, her elbows on her knees. "I was 13, she began. "We had this ceremony right where you collapsed. Same field, same setup, same ribbon waiting to be cut. A rich man stood on stage and told us he was going to build the best school our county had ever seen. I remember how proud my mom looked. I remember standing in the front row in my best dress, holding a stupid balloon. They gave us hats with the project's logo. Michael's smile faded. They dug the foundation, she continued, and then nothing. The trucks disappeared. The workers left. We waited that whole summer. The next fall, the next winter, the field grew weeds. Kids kept walking 2 miles to the old shack of a school we had. And every day I passed that site, I wondered what went wrong. She looked at him then, her eyes darker, distant. We waited for 3 years, she whispered, and nothing ever came, just promises that turned into silence. Michael's throat tightened. Iowa. That's why I don't believe in you, she said quietly. Not just you, all of you. You people who think good intentions are enough, who think showing up, giving a speech, shaking a few hands is charity, but we're the ones left behind when you forget. We're the ones who have to explain to the children why the shiny banners meant nothing. Michael stared at the ground, shame creeping into his chest like a slow burn. He had never seen this side of things so clearly, never heard the story told from the other end of the microphone. I never meant to be like that, he said. Maybe not, Iowa replied. But meaning well isn't the same as doing right. They sat in silence again. He finally asked, "Why did you stay here, after everything?" She took a breath, letting the evening air fill her lungs. "Because I couldn't leave the place that taught me what was broken. I thought maybe if I became the kind of doctor who stayed, maybe I could be the kind of adult I needed back then." Michael turned to look at her fully, admiration and guilt intertwining in his chest. "I've done a lot of things in my life," he said. "Some of them good, some of them loud. But I think this might be the first time someone's ever made me feel small in a way that matters." She looked at him again, eyes a little softer this time. "Then maybe you're not so bad after all," she said. Michael gave a faint smile, and for the first time, Iowa didn't look away. The morning Michael Thorne was officially discharged from the Willow Creek Clinic, the nurses expected him to leave town that same afternoon. After all, that was what people like him did, arrive with fanfare, leave quietly once the speeches were over and the cameras packed up. But he didn't leave. Instead, he requested a meeting with the town's building supervisor, a few local parents, and a group of teachers who had long since given up hope on ever seeing a new school. When asked why he was still around, he simply said, "I need to do a full geological reassessment of the area before we proceed with construction. Some things didn't add up." Most people didn't question it. Some shrugged. Others remained skeptical. Iowa, when she heard the news, raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. But Michael wasn't lying. Not exactly. He did plan to review the building plans. But beneath that, something deeper had shifted, something Iowa had unknowingly stirred. He was no longer interested in building a school for press or public relations. He wanted to build it right. For them. For her. Each morning he left the small room he had rented above the hardware store and walked the dirt roads of the town. He spoke to families, asked questions, took notes. He sat with teachers in aging classrooms, where ceiling tiles sagged and textbooks dated back to the early 2000s. He played soccer with kids in barefoot clusters and listened to what they wanted in a school. More than chalkboards and desks. They wanted color, music, and a place they didn't have to share with the termites. He listened. He didn't interrupt or defend himself when an older man grumbled, "You're just another city boy playing savior." He didn't flinch when a mother said, "They always promise ramps for our wheelchairs but never build them." He just wrote it all down. Everything. When Iowa saw him again, it was by accident. She had just finished her evening rounds and was cutting across the back of the library when she spotted him sitting cross-legged on the porch of the community center, surrounded by 3 kids, all talking at once, waving pieces of paper. He was sketching something on a large notepad, crude drawings of a playground, labeled with the kids' ideas: slide with dragon tail, treehouse reading nook, swings that don't squeak. She lingered, unnoticed, for a moment longer than she should have. The next day, Michael dropped by the clinic, not as a patient but with a question. "I need someone with medical knowledge to help me design the school's first aid room," he said. "Think you could spare a few hours?" Iowa looked at him, guarded as always. "You're really doing this?" He nodded. "Not for headlines, just for them." Her gaze searched his, looking for the usual glint of ego, but it wasn't there. She agreed. And over the next few days, she found herself roped into more meetings. What began as consultation on the medical room turned into discussions on lunch programs, mental health support, and how to make the school a safe space for kids dealing with trauma. Michael took her suggestions seriously. He didn't patronize. He didn't pretend to know better. He listened. And for Iowa, who had spent so long being the only one fighting for these children, that simple act of listening began to shift something inside her. One afternoon, as they walked the plot where the school's foundations would soon be laid, this time with permits, verified soil tests, and a vetted local contractor, Iowa paused. "You could have just cut the check and disappeared," she said. "Most people in your position would have." Michael smiled, brushing dust from his jeans. "I'm not most people." She narrowed her eyes slightly. "You used to be." He laughed, the sound low and genuine. "Yeah, I think I did." They stood in silence for a while, the wind rustling through the trees nearby. The sun cast long shadows over the lot, and in those quiet seconds neither of them looked away. "Why this town?" she asked softly. "Why stay?" He hesitated before answering. "Because someone here told me that good intentions aren't enough. That people like me cause more harm than good when we show up with half a plan, and because I want to be the man who proves her wrong." Iowa didn't smile, not fully, but her eyes softened. "Maybe," she said. "You already are." That evening, when she returned to the clinic, Judith raised an eyebrow. "You've been out with the billionaire again?" "He's not acting like a billionaire," Iowa replied, almost to herself. Judith smirked. "Well, let me know if he starts building the moon." But Iowa said nothing. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the folded blueprint Michael had given her to review, sketched in pencil, smudged by fingerprints, and scribbled with suggestions from 10-year-olds. It wasn't perfect, but for the first time in years, it looked real. The rain started as a whisper on the rooftops, a soft tapping that barely stirred attention. But within hours the sky turned slate gray, and the winds rose like a living thing. By nightfall, Willow Creek was drowning in a storm fiercer than any the town had seen in years. The river overflowed first, then the muddy roads collapsed under the weight of water and panic. Lightning lit up the sky like war, thunder shaking windows already rattling in their frames. The clinic lost power just after midnight. The roof began to leak by 2. By 3, half of it had torn away completely. Iowa was drenched, running from room to room with a flashlight clamped between her teeth, trying to move patients to the lower levels while holding gauze against a bleeding forehead, shouting over the wind for someone to stabilize the IVs. When the back door banged open, she spun around, expecting more wind, more chaos. Instead, it was Michael. He was soaked to the bone, his clothes plastered to his skin, mud streaking his jeans, one arm cradling a shivering child, the other dragging a bag of medical supplies behind him. "You're not supposed to be here," she shouted. "I found 2 kids in a flooded house down by the bridge," he yelled back. "Their mom's still trapped on the roof. I told the rescue team where. Michael, your heart." Still beating, she stared at him, wild-eyed, soaked, breathless, and felt something shift again. Not admiration, not fear, something closer to disbelief. "Get them inside," she ordered. He obeyed without another word. The night unfolded like a battlefield. They moved together through water and darkness, dragging sandbags across doorways, stabilizing a broken leg with scraps of wood, clearing debris off the front steps to make room for emergency vehicles. Michael never stopped. Not when the wind knocked him sideways. Not when his hands blistered. Not even when Iowa caught him gripping his chest for half a second too long. "You need to sit down," she told him. "Later," he replied. By sunrise, the storm had passed, but the town was raw. Broken roads, uprooted trees, windows shattered and lives upended. And Michael was burning with fever. Iowa found him slumped on a cot near the clinic's supply room, shivering under a soaked blanket, his skin clammy and pale. She knelt beside him, brushing the damp hair from his forehead. "You stupid, stupid man." His eyes fluttered open. "We saved them, right?" "Yes," she said quietly, "but now you're the one I have to save." He tried to smile, but the effort sent him into a fit of coughing. Iowa called Judith and 2 nurses. They moved quickly, setting up an IV, bundling him in dry blankets, checking his vitals. He had pushed his already fragile heart too far. Dehydration, exposure, exhaustion, his body was screaming. That night the clinic glowed dimly under emergency lighting. Patients slept on cots and floors, nurses dozed in shifts. But Iowa never left Michael's side. She sat in a metal chair pulled up to his bed, a damp cloth in one hand, the other resting on his arm. She watched every twitch of his eyelids, every rise and fall of his chest. "You idiot," she whispered once, not unkindly. "You could have died. Again." Michael didn't answer. He slept like the dead, but there was no doubt he was still fighting. Hours passed. Outside the wind had died. The rain had stopped. Inside, the silence between them was full of unspoken things. By morning, Michael's fever broke. He opened his eyes slowly, finding Iowa already looking at him, her hair a mess, her eyes ringed with exhaustion. "You stayed," he croaked. "You think I'd leave after everything you just pulled?" He smiled weakly. "Would have been justified." She shook her head, not bothering to hide the emotion in her voice now. "Michael," she said quietly, "you didn't have to do all that. You could have left. No one would have blamed you. I couldn't leave," he replied. "Not while this town still needed hands." "You almost broke yourself trying." "Maybe," he said, eyes never leaving hers, "but maybe that's what it takes to be the kind of man you'd believe in." Iowa sat back, her heart thudding. She didn't speak for a long time. Then finally she reached for his hand, and this time she didn't let go. When Michael woke again, the room was quiet. The storm was over. The clinic had regained power. Outside the windows, early morning light filtered in through the curtains, but inside, the air still felt heavy with everything unsaid. Iowa sat beside his bed, arms crossed. Her hair pulled back, but a few strands had escaped and framed her tired face. She noticed his eyes flicker open, and she sat up a little straighter. "You're back," she said softly. Michael managed a faint smile. "I guess I'm making a habit of waking up to you." She rolled her eyes, but there was no real annoyance in it. He looked at her for a long moment, then said, voice low and rough, "You're the first person I've met in a very long time who didn't look at me with awe." Her brow furrowed. "That's good?" "It's honest," he replied. "You didn't flatter me. You didn't need me. You looked me in the eye and told me the truth, even when it was the last thing I wanted to hear." Iowa didn't respond. Michael took a breath, his voice growing steadier. "You're also the first person who made me want to do something right, not for my name, not for legacy, just right." A silence hung in the air between them, dense with meaning. She lowered her gaze. "You scared me, you know, that night." "I know," he said. "I scared myself too." Iowa looked up again, and something in her eyes, soft but guarded, made him pause. "I want to believe in people," she said, "but it's hard when you've been let down so many times. Not just by strangers, by the people who were supposed to stay, to care." Michael nodded. "I'm not asking you to believe in me. Not yet. Just maybe give me the chance to keep showing up." For a long moment she said nothing. Then she reached forward, gently adjusting the blanket over his shoulder. "Rest," she murmured. "You'll need energy." "For what?" he asked, smiling faintly. "For a ribbon cutting." 2 weeks later the town gathered again on the same field, but this time it was different. No fancy stage, no media vans, no flashy suits. Just people, families, children in freshly ironed clothes, parents holding hands, teachers wiping tears before the ceremony began. The school stood proudly now, complete, no half walls, no rusted beams. There were classrooms with desks, chalkboards, reading nooks, a real playground with bright swings, a modest library filled with books, many of them donated by people who had heard Michael's story, and wanted to be part of something real. Michael stood off to the side, dressed simply in a button-down shirt and jeans. No entourage, no announcement of who he was. The townspeople knew, but they also knew he had stayed. They had seen him sweat, haul bricks, sit in planning meetings, walk door to door with surveys. He wasn't the man from the magazine anymore. He was Mike, the one who showed up. The mayor gave a short speech. The principal thanked the builders, the donors, the community, and then came the moment Iowa had secretly dreaded. They asked her to cut the ribbon. She hesitated, then stepped forward, scissors trembling slightly in her hand. Before she cut, she turned her head and looked to the back of the crowd. Michael stood there, hands in his pockets, watching quietly. She met his eyes, and suddenly the weight of it all, years of disappointment, of waiting, of lost hope, crashed into her. But this time, it wasn't pain. It was release. She looked back at the ribbon, then snipped it in one clean cut. The crowd erupted in applause. Children ran forward, doors opened, teachers ushered students inside for their first day in a real school built just for them. Iowa stepped back, blinking fast. Tears welled in her eyes and spilled down her cheeks. She tried to wipe them away quickly, but they came too fast. And then he was there. Michael didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He just stood beside her, close but not too close, and handed her a folded handkerchief. She took it, smiled through her tears, and whispered, "You did it." He shook his head gently. "No, we did." They stood there, side by side, as the schoolyard filled with laughter. For the first time in years, Iowa let herself believe that maybe not everything built with hope had to fall apart. Some things could stand. 1 year later, Willow Creek no longer looked like the forgotten town Michael had first driven into. Sunrise Elementary stood tall and proud, its red brick walls glowing beneath the morning sun, laughter echoing through its hallways. The playground was always full, the library never quiet. It wasn't just a building anymore. It was a promise kept. Iowa Rivers, now officially Dr. Rivers, had become the head of the newly renovated Willow Creek Medical Center, built just across from the school, with funds quietly provided by Michael. She led a team of young, passionate healthcare workers and ran free clinics twice a week. Children called her Doc EO. Elderly patients brought her jars of homemade jam and stories of their grandchildren. Michael never left. He sold off parts of his company, kept a modest team running things from afar, and moved into a small home at the edge of town. He taught business basics at the school every Wednesday afternoon and helped organize community projects. But most of the time, he was simply Mr. Mike, the man who brought books, baked cookies with the kids, and helped fix the squeaky swing that kept breaking. Together, Iowa and Michael became the steady heart of Willow Creek. Their love wasn't flashy. It was slow-burning, rooted, strong. One late afternoon in early spring, after a long day of treating patients and reviewing lesson plans, Michael asked Iowa to walk with him through the garden behind the school. The trees were just beginning to bloom, the air fragrant with new life. They paused beneath the almond tree where years earlier they had once taken shelter from a sudden summer storm. Iowa reached up and touched one of the petals absently. Michael turned to her. "I came here thinking I'd build a school," he said, reaching into his coat pocket. "But you taught me how to build a home." He dropped to one knee, and in his hand was a simple silver ring. "Will you marry me, Iowa?" She stared at him, breath caught in her chest, her eyes filled with tears, and without a single word, she dropped to her knees too, wrapped her arms around him, and whispered a trembling yes. A month later, the wedding took place in the very courtyard of Sunrise Elementary. The children served as flower bearers and ring carriers. The townspeople decorated the space with wildflowers and handmade banners. There were no photographers, no designer gowns, no celebrity guests, just joy, laughter, and a love everyone had helped grow. Iowa wore a simple white dress, her hair curled gently around her shoulders. Michael stood waiting under an arch of sunflowers and woven branches. When she walked down the aisle, the applause echoed off the school's new walls, and not a single dry eye remained. They danced to an old record player beneath the stars. Someone baked too many pies. The mayor gave a speech that made everyone laugh, and when the night ended, Michael and Iowa walked home barefoot, her heels in one hand, his jacket draped around her shoulders. 3 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Lila. She had Iowa's quiet strength and Michael's curious eyes. She loved story time on her dad's lap and planting flowers with her mom behind the clinic. Every morning she ran to the school fence to wave at the older kids, and every night she insisted on a bedtime story about how her parents built a school and found each other. Michael wrote part-time now, working on a book about sustainable philanthropy, based not on theories but on what he had lived. But most of his days were spent helping Iowa, raising Lila, and tending to the garden where they had first learned to grow something real. At the front of Sunrise Elementary, just beside the flagpole, a large wooden frame held a photograph taken during the first spring festival. Michael, Iowa, and little Lila, hand in hand, standing in front of the school, the sun casting a golden halo around them. Beneath the photo, etched carefully into a wooden plaque, were the words Michael had carved on the night of their wedding. "A family is not built with bricks but with hearts that stay." And in that quiet corner of the world they did just that. In a town forgotten by many, 2 hearts found their way, through storm, through struggle, and finally through the quiet grace of choosing to stay. Michael came searching for purpose, and Iowa reminded him what truly matters: presence, not promises; love, not legacy. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of the power of showing up, of building something real, then we invite you to be part of a community that believes in those same things. Subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for more true and heartfelt tales that celebrate love, resilience, and the small moments that change lives. Because sometimes, the stories that heal us start with a heart that refuses to walk away. Thank you for watching, and remember, the world is still full of good people and even better stories.